This is CWSU meteorologist in charge, David Tucker, with your tropical outlook for the 2023 season. Some basic hurricane information, discuss the hazards and preparation for the hurricane season, conduct a review of the 2022 season, and also look at a forecast for the 2023 season. The hurricane season technically runs from June 1st through November 30th, but historically the chances of hurricane activity beyond October for the state of Texas is minimal. So effectively our season ends once we get into the month of October. So what is a hurricane or tropical cyclone? This is nothing more than a storm that forms over warm waters of the tropical oceans, and it is characterized by a closed counterclockwise circulation in the northern hemisphere. And there's typically a cluster of storms around the center. Meteorologists classify these storms by wind speeds, with hurricanes having wind speeds greater than 73 miles per hour, tropical storms greater than 39, and areas with speeds less than 39 are tropical depressions. For meteorological classification of storms, we base this strictly on the wind speed, and this is talking about the Saffir-Simpson wind scale, where categories 1 through 5 are the ratings of storms. These are associated with specific storm surges, but this is not an absolute when it comes to storm surge, as classifications are based strictly on wind speeds. We also want to discuss the difference between a tropical storm or hurricane watch and a warning. The key words are possible and expected, where a watch means that conditions are possible, and a warning means that they are imminent or expected. And watches are issued 48 hours out and warnings 36 hours out when it comes to tropical storm activity. One of the issues that we have in the state of Texas, however, is that the typical warning and watch periods don't necessarily hold true, because since 2010, 9 of the 10 storms that impacted the Texas Gulf Coast developed in the Gulf of Mexico, with the exception of Hurricane Harvey. This means that Texas, on average, has less time to prepare. On average, we can expect some type of hurricane activity in the Galveston-Houston area once every 9 years, but this is not an absolute number. This is only an average. It is entirely possible to have multiple storms in one season, or storms in back-to-back years, or storms once every 18 years. The key word is that this is an average of once every 9 years. When it comes to major hurricanes, which are category 3 or higher, this interval increases to 25 years. When it comes to the potential hazards associated with hurricane activity, tornadoes rapidly spin up, especially in the feeder bands on the outskirts of a storm. Of course, damaging winds are a possibility, flooding rains, but the greater concern is storm surge flooding. Deaths associated with a storm surge are the most significant hazard in the United States, with 49 of deaths during the period from 1963 to 2012 directly attributed to storm surge. So by definition, storm surge is the rise in the mean water level associated with a tropical storm, and this is in relation to normal sea level. The storm tide is the water level that results from adding the storm surge and the normal astronomical high tides. And also don't forget that significant wave activity is possible on top of this, making storm surge a force to be reckoned with. Storm surge is always at its maximum on the east side of a storm, and this is relative to the motion of the storm. With a south to north moving storm, the eastern side of the storm is going to have the most significant activity, and this is due to the spin of counterclockwise rotation around a storm. If the storm is moving from east to west, the strongest storm surge is going to be on the north side of the storm, and this is always relative to motion. Earlier, I discussed the fact that Classifications of hurricanes are based strictly on winds, but there are typical storm surges associated with most categories of storms. However, this is not an absolute, as in the example of Hurricane Ike, which was a very large Category 2 storm. Because of the classification of this storm being on the lower end of the scale, a lot of people did not heed the evacuation orders associated with Hurricane Ike and were left to be rescued after the storm surge wiped out the peninsula. So just as a reminder, just because a storm like Ike is only a Category 2 storm, this is the devastation that can be caused where Bolivar Peninsula was effectively wiped out. Flooding is another significant concern associated with tropical systems, and this was especially the case with Hurricane Harvey. Some of the factors associating the precipitation associated with storms is the size of the storm, which typically bigger storms cause more rain. Slower movement of storms causes more rain, and storms also sometimes have higher rain rates than others. Vertical wind shear typically will cause precipitation to be on one side of a storm compared to another, and topography is also another key factor. Even though we have very little topography in the coastal regions of Texas, even a hill as much as 1 to 200 feet can cause more rain on the windward side with less rain on the back. With flooding being a significant factor in tropical systems, we do want to discuss the concerns when it comes to flooding. This graphic shows that 2/3 of all deaths associated with floods happen with people driving vehicles. The rule of thumb when it comes to flooding safety is turn around, don't drown, because as little as 2 to 3 feet of water will float most vehicles. There is a common myth around the state of Texas with the number of people driving trucks that vehicles with large oversized tires are safer to be able to drive in deeper water, but sometimes these tires actually have more air, have more buoyancy, and will float a vehicle with less water than some of the smaller tires. Additionally, once you're stuck in the water, as little as 12 inches of moving water can knock most people off balance. This is why we recommend that you stay away from creeks or ditches, especially when it comes to nighttime driving. This is a list of internet resources that are available with hurricane information. Please stop by the Center Weather Service unit at any time for this information. When it comes to preparation for tropical season, it is highly recommended that you make a written plan because you can't count on remembering everything that needs to be done, especially given the typically shorter advance warning that we experience in the state of Texas. A written plan will reduce stress significantly, and there is a template on texasprepares.org for your use. If you happen to have property in a coastal area that is susceptible to tropical activity, it is highly recommended that you have the materials needed to secure your home well in advance of any approaching storm. Typically speaking, people rush to Home Depot and Lowe's and similar stores, and lines and prices typically increase, so it is best to have everything prepared well in advance. Perform a check of your insurance as well to make sure that you have everything squared away before a storm hits. When it comes time to potentially have to evacuate, it is always best to know where you need to go before you have to go there. Also, make arrangements for your pets because not all hurricane shelters are pet friendly. It is always recommended that you leave immediately when told to evacuate by local officials. Now it is time to take a quick look at what happened during the 2022 tropical season. Through the year, we had a total of 14 named storms, and 9 of these became hurricane strength. 3 of them were Category 3 or higher, making them major storms, and those were Hurricanes Bonnie, Fiona, and Ian. This made last year a typical year. Additionally, it was also the first year in the last 8 where the season did not have its first named storm prior to the typical start of the season of June 1st. The primary change that occurred during the season last year was related to hurricane names, where we have a list of regularly scheduled names that typically does not get exhausted. However, in the past, if the season went extensive, Greek alphabet letters were used to name the storms. However, this has been occurring more and more often, so a decision was made to start taking names from advanced years, like 5 to 6 years down the road, instead of continuing to use the Greek alphabet. Now, looking forward to the current Atlantic hurricane season forecast, we can see in the graphic in the bottom right that between the 30-year period from 1980 to 2010 compared to a 30-year period from 1990 to 2020, the average number of storms and hurricanes has increased. However, this is significantly associated with the ability of meteorologists to better identify and forecast storms as opposed to being strictly associated with climate change. The forecast for the upcoming season from NOAA is expecting 12 to 17 total named storms, with 5 to 9 of these becoming hurricanes and 1 to 4 of them potentially becoming major hurricanes. The bottom line, however, is we ask you not to focus on the number of storms forecast because it doesn't really matter. Anyone who has been through a hurricane can tell you that it only takes one to make any given year a very bad year in your location. Changes taking place for the 2023 season include tropical weather outlooks being extended from 5 to 7 days. So now when these products are issued, there will be both a 2-day and a 7-day probability of formation across the region. Additionally, peak storm surge graphics, which were experimental in previous years, are becoming an operational product which will be used routinely. Finally, we are doing a better job of identifying investigative areas, and this numbers will be added to the tropical weather outlooks to better identify where they are at. One of the reasons that we are expecting a slightly below average season is because we are expected to transition into an El Nino pattern. And at present time, we are under an El Nino watch. El Nino is associated with sea surface temperatures, which are currently near or above average across most of the Pacific Ocean. And this graphic shows that from February through April, the area of above normal temperatures has been steadily drifting to the east. The outlook for upcoming months indicates that these warmer temperatures are going to continue building in the eastern Pacific Ocean, which is a strong signal for an El Nino pattern. We discuss El Nino because this does have an impact on the hurricane season, where typically we have fewer hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin due to stronger vertical shear associated with the trade winds and typically slightly cooler ocean waters. The Pacific Ocean on the west coast of the United States, however, typically has more hurricane activity during an El Nino. So in summary, last year we had an average season. This year we are forecasting a slightly below average hurricane season, but some of the cooler Atlantic waters are being offset by additional factors, making us expect only slightly fewer than the average number of storms, despite having an El Nino pattern expected. This concludes this briefing. Please stop by the Center Weather Service unit if you have any questions on this material.